Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Welcome back. I'm Dirk again.
And I'm Frank DeMarco still.
We were talking before on a lot of really strange subjects, which we'll see how people react to those. It's an interesting topic about what is reality and the path and all that. But where we ended, I think, was going into a couple of different topics. And one of them was about fear and how that ends up being so important in people's lives. And I'm not sure where we're going to go with it, but Frank, do you want to start us off here?
Yeah, because I've thought about that a good deal. In my life, every time I've been faced with a challenge and I have not met it, that I have shirked, I have always lost. I don't mean externally, but I've always lost ground. You know, the only way to live is to meet the challenges that are there. That's why they're there. But that's easily said. It's not necessarily so easily understood, especially at a young age. But I think more commonly when we talk about fear, people experience it as fear of the outside world rather than fear with turning around within themselves. And that fear always seems to be justified, and it always seems to be the only rational response to what is, you know. And so you see, I mean, in terms of politics, you see at least two major armies butting heads against each other, and I do mean butt heads, and fearing what the other side is going to do to their cherished dreams. I think both sides are idealistic. I think the ideals are different ones. They're different aspects of the same overall idea that the country was founded on, I think. But it's not nice to watch, and it's not... maybe you can help me with the mathematics here, Dirk. If you look at the other people and you see they're motivated by fear, which leads to anger, you think it's probably a good idea to add more fear and anger? Will that help the situation?
Oh, of course. It makes the fire bigger.
But if you disapprove of them, do you have any choice but to add fear and anger to it? Because this year, they're better financed than ever. And they're going to, and then fill in the blank. And the other person do the same thing from the same playbook.
Well, and so often that's seeing the mirror rather than seeing the other. That the thing that you're most afraid of is actually your own reflection in the mirror.
I'm not sure there's a distinction. I think that what you see in the mirror is what triggers what's in you. And especially, I've seen this with fanatics. The more fanatical they are, the more they have an internal part of themselves that's saying, no, that's not true. And they're using all their force to cram that one down because that's getting in the way. They have to be positive. Where certainty is the important thing, and certainty leads to strength and leads to all that stuff. Let's take a breath. They say that there are only two motivating forces in the world: love and fear, and we've taken that to mean attraction and repulsion, or let's say expansion and contraction, because there are two opposing, or let's say complementary forces in the world. I have a sneaking suspicion there might be a reason for that. They might be both needed and useful. It's not a matter of whether we like them or not. That's what it is. Well, you can look at it two ways. You can look at it in terms of your own internal life, or you can look at it probably more than two ways. You can look at it in terms of how your life matches the external world, which is what we were just doing. But it's so much easier to sort of make the external world an equivalent of a scapegoat. I'm angry because of that. I'm afraid because of that. It's objectively there. You can't argue about it. It's real. Don't tell me it's not real. What isn't
Mhm.
so common is to say that thing raises up all this anger within me. Why? Because that is, of course, a matter of self-reflection.
What's the real, yeah, what's the
I,
real source?
it is, well, it's the only thing you can do anything about also. And the only thing, fortunately, that you're required to do anything about. We've talked about, see there, we sort of segued in there. They plopped right in. I don't know if you heard that or not, but
Yep.
they talked about, well, all right, well, go ahead. Now I interrupted myself and I threw myself off the beam. Hang on a sec. What were we just talking about? The fear, but
Fear.
I shouldn't have let myself distract myself because now that
Oh, but it's
switch.
so fun to watch.
Actually, I suppose it could be instructive. This is what happens when you try and use intuitive link communication without having turban of exactly the right color, right? And I wasn't
Mhm.
facing back, so this is what gonna happen. Um, all right, well let's continue. I'm sure they'll plop back in as soon as I calm down there.
Well, let me take it a little bit different direction and see if this doesn't prime it for some reason. One of the things that I recognized a long time ago is that fear largely is biologically based, that it's a very protective thing for us of identifying things in the world that are dangers that we need to either flee from or fight or, quit
Be
moving
careful
so
of.
that they don't see us,
Yeah.
all of those different things. But that's a biologically based thing. Now, as we add intellect to that, it starts triggering some of those same motives or some of those same forces when it really shouldn't. And then you also have
Well,
the aspect, you get more than two people together, you start having some who want to gain, that they end up priming the fear pump on purpose in order to serve their own purposes.
perhaps, but you said shouldn't, and I'm not sure about that. Say a little more.
Go for it.
No, no,
No,
you
go
say a little
for it
more.
because I'm not sure where I went.
Well, you said things get stirred up and they shouldn't, and I'm going, well, you said
Yeah.
when the mind adds to the physical. Did you want to like?
Well, the should in this case is where there's really no basis or need for having gone into fear or fight. It's misinterpretation, it's misunderstanding, it's misdirection, and it's the thing of, you see this with, particularly when they do the mirror experiment where you take animals and put them in front of a mirror, and because they don't recognize themselves, they then act out some of their own internal drama about whatever this other thing there is that they're seeing in the mirror.
You just described human life. You just described 3D life. Therefore,
Right.
that's one reason to not go into the shouldn't is that is a natural actual um it actually has a useful function. Yes, there's the physical fear so that you don't put your hand on the stove more than once if it's hot. But then there is the emotional addition to it, and as you say, the mental addition, and you could almost call it a prejudice, where we don't know what else to call it when it's partly mental and partly emotional, and mostly below the level of consciousness. So it's not a robot in the sense of it's an automatic do this because of this, but it is a when this button is pushed, this pops up. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no should or shouldn't in there because all of these things, if you look at it one way, and which is the way we would argue you should, if you pardon the expression should, all of these things are indicators. If you treat the world and then you are part of the world. So if you treat the internal world and the external world as continuing series of indicators, it can help keep you guided, not so much in a way as where you should go, but as where I am now. You see, this is
Mm-hmm.
your GPS in a way. So if you see something in the external world, it's going to trigger something in you, or you're not going to notice it. We won't bother to try and defend that statement, but we'll just leave it at that. All right. In other words, if there's not some emotional resonance to it, it won't make any impact on you. But when it does, if you choose to look at it as if it were separate and had nothing to do with you, then you can judge it and say, well, those people are terrible. That was a horrible event, and so on. If you recognize that inside and outside is the same thing seen differently, you say, this is making an impact on me, not because of itself only, but because it connects with something within me that is perhaps, not necessarily, but usually beneath my level of consciousness. Because it becomes not only a GPS to tell you where you're at, but a diagnostician. It says, oh, here's something, here's an automatic response that I was not aware of, or something on that order. So, again, you can't say it's bad just because it's uncomfortable. In fact, you could almost, not quite, make the opposite. It's uncomfortable, therefore it's possibly productive.
And in going through life, I've particularly known some people who are really adept at using those tools, where something will come up and there's hostility that develops, or fear of one form or another. And their response is not to engage it, but instead to go to a place of trying to seek a better understanding of what's happening and what's triggering this for you and how can I help? And ending up diffusing the situation instead of pouring gasoline on the fire.
We would say they probably should ask, what's triggering this in me? Not just in you.
Well, that they do that as well.
Yeah.
And most often the best ones at that have actually done that, of focused on what's happening in them rather than what's happening in the other.
Well, that has just a procedural advantage. When you say, oh, when this happens between you and me, here's what the effect on me, and here's what I think it's triggering. That disarms the other person. They're no longer being attacked. They're no longer being said, you're wrong. They're actually like overhearing the impact of themselves on another person without any blame attaching. Very potentially very well. In fact, that is what a therapist does. If you probably wouldn't look at it that way, but you might, and you might do it justly. The idea is make it conscious in a person without them feeling attacked. If you can do that, they're much more likely to be able to open up a little bit. And of course, opening up, loosening up, that's the name of the game.
Well, and I've also seen, particularly I've seen a lot in my life where I'll go into a situation where I have no idea there's a lot of parties involved and they're having a lot of difficulties. And if I take a completely neutral stance, that doesn't work well. And the reason that it seems to happen is that the parties involved on many different sides are expecting that there is some negative there. They are primed to react to it. And when they see nothing, they think there's a negative that's hidden, that's waiting for them.
Well, they're saying, he's not on my side, therefore he must be on their side. How can he possibly be on their side? He's either a knave or a dope. And you see it all the time, sure.
Yeah. And so you kind of have to actively go into situations in the same mode as the other folks I was talking about, where they're looking at themselves and describing what's happening for them to try to build sympathy or resonance with others to help diffuse the situation actively.
Bear in mind, this is what we would say is real work. That is to say, effective work. This is the only real work there is. Now, we know that particularly at this moment, many people are concerned about the external world and how many people have stopped saying, how do I make a better world? And they're going, how do I stop the world from getting worse? And that isn't like it's something that can be ignored or even should be ignored, but you don't unscrew a screw with a hammer, and you don't usually hammer nails with a wrench. It can be done, but it can't be done very well. And so if
I've seen those both done. I've seen both of those done.
Well, it can be done. A dog can be taught to walk too, but it's not very aesthetically pleasing. So the thing is, why do something once you realize what does work and what doesn't work, why do it the way that doesn't work? That doesn't mean that people should or should not engage in political causes or ecological cause, any kind of cause at all. That's your own decisions to make. But anything taken in preference to working on yourself is going to be less effective. It's unfortunate that people can't see that intuitively. Initially, many people would have to take that on faith, and that's a lot to take on faith. It seems counterintuitive.
So, what do people most need to know about how to pursue this for themselves?
Consciousness, consciousness, consciousness. It's always the same thing. How do you become more conscious of who you are and what motivates you and where you're stuck, where you could actually make some progress. It doesn't sound like anything at all, but we would be delighted if you can name something that's more effective than that. We talked.
The thing I've seen that the thing I've seen that also helps, I've seen people employ the strategy of finding the brightness in others, finding the good, if you will, but finding something attractive and beneficent.
You could paraphrase that as they're choosing love over fear. They're choosing to connect rather than to make differentiation and say, no, I'm this, they're that. Yes. Yeah, that's very true. But we would say the most important thing is a conscious awareness that what you can work on is yourself, and that's all you can work on directly. Because you see, that then gives you permission to do the only thing that's worthwhile doing anyway. As opposed to saying, well, but if I spend time working on myself, I'm not helping to save the whales, or I'm not stopping, the opposition party, or I'm not ending war, famine, poverty, and disease, all that. Well, you're not stopping them anyway. But what doing that instead of working on yourself will do is guarantee that you'll be less effective, if you're effective at all. But working on yourself doesn't mean you can't do those things. It'll make you more effective in doing them, if anything. But you know this. I mean, Dirk, you and Frank know this anyway, and it's the only difficulty is that for many people it's a step too far for them to take, because they can't actually feel the innate connection between inner and outer. When that connection is lost or never gained, whichever way you want to look at it, then many things that are peripheral look like they're central, and vice versa. Nothing. We're not saying anything is really exciting. It's not difficult conceptually.
How can we help them get there?
You're doing it. Making people aware of the possibility is most of the problem. Many people will do it once they realize it can be done, or once they're willing to make the leap of faith and say, well, I don't know if it'll be done or if it'll work or not, but I'll try. Once they've done it, then the heavy lifting is over. But beyond that, encourage people to be in good contact with their guidance, because those who are of benign intent and those who want to save the world and realize that the way to save the world is to save themselves, they'll find their own path. No one needs to lead them down the path. They'll find it. They'll make it. The way to make a path is to choose. You will choose automatically, or you will choose consciously. And we would say consciously is always better.
Well, and then there's the old aphorism of, particularly with fears and hate and all of that, is when you find yourself in a hole, the first thing is to stop digging.
Well, unless you want to be in a hole and you want to keep digging, man. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, you've heard me say, Dirk, there's all this hatred around. Maybe if we add more hatred, that'll be less hatred in the world. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Right.
But
new math.
But you could put that in different words and people would agree with it. If you said
Mhm.
those forces are evil and what we need to do is to mass our forces so that we can oppose that evil, that sounds like we're going to oppose them effectively. And to me, it sounds like we're
Mhm.
going to add more anger to anger and more hatred to hatred, and we're going to see if we can come up with a better result. It isn't like it's chemistry where it's plus and a minus and boom, although it could be more like matter and antimatter.
More like boom. Yeah, that can be a really bad thing.
Yeah, but it doesn't last very long. uh,
It's enlightening as well.
I wish I
Yeah,
could remember what
you
you guys were going
when
to
you say
say.
that, you remind me of an experiment I used to do that in training people about hazardous materials, I would do something that I will tell anybody watching, never ever do this.
Don't do this at home, kids.
Don't even do this when you know what you're doing. Um, it, anyway, but one of the things I would do is take a very, very teeny little graduated cylinder or a little vessel and put about 5 milliliters of isopropyl alcohol in it. And then, with an audience at a good distance watching, including the fire marshal, and having all the appropriate safety gear and whatnot, is very carefully add about an equal amount of nitric acid to it. And it takes it about no seconds to react, and suddenly you have flames 15 feet tall and then gone.
Every
You get the
teenager
very strong
watching
sense
this,
you should never mix these.
every teenager who's watching this is going, "Oh, I bet I could do that."
No,
uh,
you will hurt yourself. But it is the idea that just adding more hate and anger into the world does not help.
what we could do, actually, maybe your guys will help us, since it's my idea. Um, what about frustration? What do people do when they look at the world and it really affects them? They're frustrated by it, They're all their best instincts say this is rotten. What can they do?
I don't have an answer, so let me step aside. Frustration is a key state. It's recognizing that things are not what you want them to be and that you want them to be different. And in recognizing that, you've made the first step to actually solving it. The problem is that you don't see the path forward clearly. And the path in most cases is to go down a way that heads towards charitability and love. That in doing those, you can temper the very things that you're trying to eliminate. It is the strongest, most potent weapon against fear and hate.
Well, I have no objection to any of that. That certainly sounds right on the money. But we're old enough, I am anyway. You may not be quite old enough to remember the early days of the civil rights movement. And Martin
Mm-hmm.
Luther King was just brilliant because he knew that at that time in that place, if it looked like Negro rights were going to only come through violence, white society would clamp down on it the way it was doing in the worst part of the Deep South. And he recognized nonviolence is the only way to do this because it doesn't threaten people. That I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why more hasn't been made of that because it's truly brilliant. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes right to the stem of things. And anybody who is and I've read there were Southern editorial writers who were looking at some of the things like when the early the Freedom Riders were being attacked by various enraged white scum, and editorial writers in the South were going, Robert E. Lee wouldn't have spit on these people, meaning the attackers. Forget who it was said that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Richmond, Virginia editorial, but the point of it was anybody even if they were enmeshed in that society and part of them could see it as an attack on everything they knew, the essential indecency of what was happening came through in a way that it would not have come through if there was also a level of violence. And you saw when people like Stokely Carmichael came in and advocated burning things down, the whole atmosphere changed. which is probably why somebody decided they had to kill King, because it was too effective. That's a political. We wandered into politics. What would you or I have been able to do had we known what we know now, and had we been grown-ups then? What could we have done internally that would have been of any use at all?
Well, the things that strike me are things like Twyman and the work that he did in the Middle East, where if you end up going into the situation and intending and putting out there the kinds of energies that support peace, that reaches beyond yourself in ways that physics doesn't explain by any means.
Thus,
and that you can actually, right, it's the same thing. And, whether people are coming from a religious tradition where they're doing it through prayer, if they've done it, not in the I want kind of mode, but in offering out what they really are trying to get, then it can work. And it doesn't have to be religious. It doesn't have to be anything. It can be just knowing that where you want it to be is a place that is better than is now. And how to get there is through the charity and love and not through anger and hate. Now, at the same time, there's also the problem, and I know I suffer from this as well as anybody else, of in the moment, it's hard to remember this and it's easy to react.
And it's a defeat if you allow yourself to be distracted that way. It's true.
But not to beat up on yourself if you do, just do better next time.
That's all you can, yes, ever. By the way, I think the advantage that the Black people had in the 50s and the 60s was that they were mostly church members. And I'm thinking not in terms so much of prayer as of community. They had a something that held them together as a community, and it didn't feel like one individual against the whole society. It was like we, even though we're vastly outnumbered, are in this together. And if you don't have that, I don't know. No, I don't know what substitutes for it. We've become a nation of television.
And the amazing thing is, it doesn't necessarily take a lot of people. You need the right key people to be the ones involved in leading that to cause the reaction to proceed.
Look what's happening now. We're sliding, you and I are both sliding away from what can I as an individual do, and immediately we're moving into, and
somebody
not
else.
Yes, things aren't
right.
also necessary. But it's so tempting, or not tempting, it's so automatic to think to have any large effect, it's got to be, but it always starts with an individual. And the only
Starts
individual
with
I know
yourself.
is me. Yeah.
Well, that's Michael Jackson. I'm going to start with the guy in the mirror.
I don't know that one. All right.
Oh, it's one of his songs, The Man in the Mirror.
Well, so I think we solved this problem. Did we solve it, or did
World peace has now descended. Yeah, right.
I saw a bumper sticker that said "Visualize world peace"?
Yes.
WHIRL, Anyway, all right. Well, another time. We'll do this
Until
again.
next time.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
You too.
If you enjoyed this episode, please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.